If you've lost your point on a love triangle, I recommend that you visit the Wicked Witch of West London. Those early morning journeys home from Bodycourt took me right past the smirking hologram that enchanted her front doors. This was the place where I would try to reconnect with my old Premier League friends. At first I thought that I'd acquired some kind of social disease. So heavy was the effect that I had to go out every night after work, and imagined that if I were to go home a single night, I would start spreading boring gossip to my wallpaper. Once I went home for 2 nights in succession, and I could have sworn that the wallpaper had a nervous breakdown and stripped itself off the walls. In reality, I know now that it was much more complex than that. But what does it matter now? I just knew at that time that I had to find an excuse to play the game, that to me, there were no poor tables. Every single table was a winner. To me, even with all of its risks, gaming brought art and life together. There was a vain attempt to act in some sensible space between the two, but it was difficult, because when the West End shows closed and the stage doors opened, all of the dreamers and show people went to Cleo's. On the nights that I did make it all the way home from work, I would shower luxuriously, pull on my cleanest shirt, lock the door to the apartment, walk out of Garland Beach Terrace and onto the King's Road to follow my instincts and superstitions. I would never step on the cracks in the pavement and would always stay on the right-hand side of the street so that I could check in with Paul, the late-night grocer, a young man full of intrigue who wore a peacock haircut and pretty green shoes from Carnaby Street. The racks were filled with exotic liqueur miniatures and beautifully engineered electronic cigarettes, and there he would stand behind the counter singing edgy political songs at the far end of an Aladdin's cave of brand labels. All I could ever do was nod along in agreement with his pearls of perception, but I never listened when he tried to warn me about Cleo's. I would just smile and walk out of the shop, a satisfied smoker breezing off in a cloud of puff to an evening of fetid freedom, manfully striding past the handsome young Turks who sat outside the cafe, playing backgammon, drinking old-fashioned coffee and smoking apple tobacco from a bubbling shisha pipe. Onward I would march, past the teddy boy outfitter and movie poster store, across the lights, through rebellious car sounds and past Sloane Square's black glossy doors and white pillars, to check my reflection in the window of Burble's jewellery shop, my mojo rising as I stepped under the glass arch of West End Arcade. I tapped along with those tiny mosaic tiles beneath my feet 100 times, and each time I noticed something new. The eyes of Aphrodite, the flowers of Dionysus, the mother of pearl inside the shell of Venus and Achilles' heel, white fan-tailed doves resting on the botanical vine with tendrils that grew into spirals, circling overhead in a Wake's vortex, and the moon, the most fluid, white, liquid moon, the brightest I'd ever seen, pouring in through the skylight. On that night I heard the haunting whistling of another night owl just like me, a smudgy-eyed retro-romantic, another martyr to the glory, waiting behind me to use the hole in the wall. The music that poured into the arcade from Cleo's was right on par with a religious cult. Unstoppable rhythm guitars and a tenor sax solo that made my feet tap out a riff walking up the arcade. The thrashing and pounding of a brass gong were both a battle cry and a welcoming call to the shrine. I couldn't think until I got there. The dancers outside became national stars over that season. It was easy to see why. They'd been encouraged to interact with the guests. Dressed in animal skin lingerie, they weaved their way in and out of the flamethrower. On the weekend, a younger set came pouring in from the surrounding boroughs. In-crowds from Richmond, Barking and Dagenham would hang around, posing 10 deep outside the club, spilling into the road, stalling traffic and annoying the coppers assigned to move their swelling numbers along. With their white shirts flashed diode blue by the headlights of electric muscle cars, they created such a frisson of tension and malaise in the warm night air. It was the same attitude that set the scene for the balmy nights ahead. Every nightclub worth the plastic has an entrance policy. God's Gate, as it was affectionately known, was no exception. Given worked the heavy bronze doors, a twiggy-haired chooser who would perfectly match people to their faces in a copy of Rolling Stone magazine, with a black fingernail blessing pages and foreheads as he moved along the line. His peeps believed so deeply in his personal touch that it became a holy rite of passage. With those pretty brown eyes, ashen blue feather in his hat, and the natural ability to arouse sympathy, I thought there was definitely some of the Romany about him. Rested somewhere between a man and a woman, with all of his preferences bound by musical ties and the invisible shackles of love, loosely caressed by a leotard that could have easily have passed as a little pink dress. He bounced around on a drumbeat that pounded him senseless, treading that difficult path which circles social attitudes, celebrating everything glamorous and outrageous. To be fair, as far as bus-stop queues go, Givens was one of the most curious. He would fall in for a quick chat before fainting away to the next in line. If the signals were correct, he would hold up the back of his hand for you to kiss. He clearly made a pact with the rainbow's end. The contract fluttered from his bag in the form of a turquoise butterfly.
"You're a butterfly collector!"
one reveller shouted from the queue.
"Yes, they follow me everywhere, darling. Descend upon me from the trees."
As the butterfly made for an open window above the crowd, Given called after it.
"No, go, be free, and don't forget to fall in love. Don't have that long, lovey."
New York has the Plaza, Rio de Janeiro, the Copacabana, but in terms of keeping their customers satisfied, Cleopatra's hotel, nightclub and casino took some beating. The Pride of Chelsea welcomed some of the world's biggest stars and the most powerful individuals, boasted over 100 rooms, 13 glass pyramids, and the comfiest indoor poolside mattresses this side of Harrods. In that little corner of the city, the nouveau riche were checking in droves. The place had become a symbol of economic extremes, with a clientele seemingly hell-bent on blowing as much money as possible in a single session. The foyer looked like a live audition for a travelling zoo. Vidal the Merton leopard had exchanged his spots for urban camouflage and a boutique job on Conduit Street. Suki the saber-toothed kitten was in a relationship with a Harley Street dentist. The fangs were a coming-of-age gift, and at their most gamey were the emerald-green contact lenses she wore to complete the effect. The fake ID her brother made for her was the icing on her birthday cake, 19 candles wide. There was Sheikh Albar, or Abdul No Socks, as we call him, and his minders, the Samoan twins. A real-life sheikh from the Emirates who lost so much money at Cleo's they printed commemorative blue chips with his face on both sides. I'm sure they are legal tender somewhere in the Middle East. Most of the girls in the queue were there to meet a rich man. Florence was no exception, a fire-eater from Cirque du Soleil. She'd been based in Los Angeles, and whilst living undercover as a down-and-out selling star guides on Rainbow Road, she met an oil man who she'd brought along on a chain. When he got up from his knees, she granted him one shorter draw on a cigarette. Then he was back on all fours for the rest of the routine. She kept some pretty bad company. They all lived 6 to a room in a compact studio in Bayswater. All in all, it was a motley crew of complete strangers, who collectively brought about a sense of forgiveness, reconciliation, and love in a family way. They were thinking about opening the night up to normal people, but that would take the queue right round the corner and really scupper the theme. For Abide, the waiting was boring. She was out and proud and somewhere in between worlds. How could she ever push that first experience aside? She'd been curious ever since. She didn't want the frugal life. She wanted it on her terms. She was always looking for people who intrigued her. Never waited to see if they were attracted to her. Of course they would be. You only had to see Abide, and in an instant she knew you. She would shift around as you moved. Follow you. I couldn't see her eyes. I could feel them on me. She selected me in the queue, wrote her name across my back with a fingertip, told me how wasted I looked, danced with me politely, and then closer and more serious. Within no time she was pressing herself against my groin, kissing me deeply. To help seal the deal, she began whispering that she was looking for someone that she could pursue with all her heart, even if it was for the briefest of times. She told me that the first time she was on a love triangle, it was like losing her virginity, and she can't resolve her complex. I couldn't have handled a woman like that, way too fluent in the language of sex. It would have been another one of those burlesque friendships that went physically toxic. With her imported ideals from the Hamburg School of Seduction, she kept coming out in Cleo's. She soon breezed off and found herself on another tripod of mutually destructive behaviour. Her and her two dancers made one by the eternal mystery of bad love. She says it brings out the Christmas feeling. If you're really lucky, you might bag a rare audience with the mastermind behind the place. The bad boy of high concept, Gene Baker. A mild-mannered Egyptian multimillionaire with the skin the darkest shade of the Pantone and eyes of a paranormal green. A black chip Svengali, blessed with the power to charm modern love in from the streets. On that night she walked beside him, all falling and clingy, together with 6 female groupiers, who turned full circle through a fine mist of gold, before heading into the green to begin casting their spell over the tables. Gene's sun-worship theme parties were legendary. It was more than a rumour. He personally financed the upkeep of a harem, and challenged anyone who said money can't buy love, with his philosophy that was shared with anyone who was able to penetrate his security.
I am a closet romantic, rich beyond dreams and too much a slave to pleasure of the flesh to reach a place anywhere close to the moral center.
He'd walked to the club in open-toe sneakers and faded blue jeans, torn at the knees, and his favourite superstar shirt. Ever the master of easy rapport and reserved friendliness, he lowered his shades and exchanged cheery talk about the humidity of the evening as he shook hands with the wide-eyed party people who'd formed a queue outside the club. He politely invited a stranger into the conversation whilst admiring the cut of his suit and committing to memory the impression made by the wallet on the inside of his trouser pocket. He twisted the dax deeper into his waxy roots, cracked open a gold cigarette case, and slid out a purple and gold cigarette. As he gave a light tap on the side of the case, a hand came from behind to offer a light. Gene accepted with a short smile, and invited one of the wealthier-looking guests into his company, saying,
"You have a God-given talent, Mr. Lloyd, and with all that love in your life, you need it. Now come with me, and I will show you why luck is a lady."
They walked the full length of the red carpet toward the great swallow of the double doors, with Gene encouraging brief interviews along the way.
"In a year or so, I should be ready to take the show to the new world,"
he tells one camera.
"It's full of people who are about to know who I am and what I can do."
He was confidently fielding questions about the recent Christie's auction when a journalist from CNN bowled him a curveball, a question about the recent binary weapon attack on a bar in Leicester Square and whether he felt that his club might become the next target.
"The security of Cleopatra's is of paramount importance. We are well covered, I can assure you of that."
There had been talk of his empire funding the war, and I was surprised when he answered the next question without breaking his stride. "Mr. Baker, with the whole world waiting to see if the war escalates, Are we to believe the rumours that you'll be playing a bigger role? He made his reply in a casual way.
The answer to that question, my friend, is blowing in the eastern wind.
It was the next question that really stunned me. The journalist had his yellow microphone bowl pushed right under Jean's nose. Mr. Baker, do you think that the West should spend more money on the exportation of arms or food?
Well, food just makes us fat, and I have to go now. Thank you.
There was a latination, faintly whispered, as the security welcomed the boss through the double doors. I couldn't really work the place out at first. It was a sort of laboratory where money, art, music, and gossip were all produced indiscriminately. A place where business and worldly pleasures mingled, with an approach that was having a profound effect on London culture. The most eccentric characters would come to the club. It became a burgeoning magnet for eccentric millionaires, junkies, and international aristocracy. During my initiation, it seemed cynical, almost dehumanized and indifferent to the great scandals that were making the news. Jean seemed to be in the position of a television spectator who, in the face of all the scandal, was mildly perturbed, in very much the same way as someone would be with a disturbance that broke their uninterrupted view of the cricket. Inside the lobby area of the club were 3 colossal ornamental androsphinx, which guarded the entrance to a 6-story stone building filled with glass chambers and freshwater canals. Positioned within a stained-glass ceiling, a shimmering glitter ball produced 1,000 lights that illuminated every surface in a swirling carousel of coloured squares. Historically, the place had a checkered reputation. On the one hand, it was a well-respected government cash cow that the taxman claimed helped build civilization, while on the other hand, it didn't seem to feature in the global, supposedly transparent tax system. The place had its own trust fund that operated like a banana republic. Nobody seemed to know or care what the rules were. The biggest element of its success was tax avoidance, on which it based its economy. That part seemed obvious, even to me. It was structured for rich private individuals. Nothing seemed completely straight about the place. Rupert, the bearded brand manager, tried to remain discreetly bisexual whilst helping rich individuals invest in Jean's various schemes, with little interest in where the money had come from or how much tax was, or wasn't, being paid. After having cybersex with some online cowboy, he fell asleep on his keyboard and transferred 666,666,066 cents into his own account. Claimed it was an accident. Jean said that there was only one word in the English language to describe it: devilish. Everyone accepted that the club had links to organized crime. There were always rumors of corruption circulating. Once you'd accepted that a robot was mixing your cocktails, you had to get with the fact that the place was saturated with hidden meaning. The temple columns were digital pillars, alive and pregnant with enigmas, and the suggestion of links to ancient Egypt. What I mean is, there appeared to be a common pool of symbolic meaning, a mass mind that existed outside of any one individual, a mastermind that certain members could tap into. I wasn't the only one to notice. I spoke to an Oxford graduate who sloshed a large glass of red wine around as he announced that within this mass mind there was a set of symbolic blueprints that were acknowledged between people and acted as building blocks for a new order. That the people involved could share things at a deep unconscious level, that all of the minds of the wide-eyed people around us were somehow interlinked and provided a sort of landscape where this new order could flourish. I noticed one thing for sure. The exchange of strange hand gestures between people was prevalent. Their sign language seemed bizarre to me, but it was a language I wanted to explore. They all looked as though they were having a blast, and I wanted to be part of it. I certainly did that, and by doing so unfastened a very large window to a rich and fascinating journey that opened my eyes to a whole new reality. It was weird. I started to build up a subconscious alphabet of my own. Everything seemed to revolve around the new symbols in my head. As the place grew on me, I began making sketches of everything I saw. I cut my first wisdom tooth on an olive stone from the all-you-can-eat buffet. I should have taken that as a sign. Of course, I didn't. Once the Oxford chap had taught me his step-by-step set of operations to make young women instantly attracted to punks like me, the place was a young man's dream. It was their movement to the music, the blue liner carefully painted on the lids of darting, flashing eyes. I was dazzled. I was Frank Sinatra with the world on a string, and in this new world there were these pyramid-shaped playrooms inhabited by thrilled city suits and cocktail dresses. When I made my way down to the gaming floor, the draw was intense. The casino lights turned me on, thousands and thousands of them. I could feel their heat warming me at a subconscious level. They influenced my every mood, even the way the glass was configured in the apex of the roof, crystals that blessed moonless nights with enough starlight to illuminate all of the upper balconies. What struck me most was the zen-like simplicity of the machines with their synthetic voices, and with one crank of a lever 100 magic symbols competed for my attention, my mind, and the cash in my wallet. I mingled well with the other customers, set to lose like aimless computers, slavishly obeying any instruction given to them by a machine. There was no sense of triumph or defeat. I was totally transfixed by the rapture of the ivory ball striking the chrome of the roulette wheel. I realized now that the place was growing in my mind. Through the club's cool deception, I was absorbing layers of meaning that I hadn't really noticed at the time. All that I was aware of was that I was moving from machine to machine, with my heart racing and my pulse increasing and decreasing, totally out of rhythm with the pyramids. They were always constant, with a monotonous ticking undercurrent of haste.